CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.
Welcome to yet another episode on Conversations on African Philanthropy with me, Beginkos Moyo, the Director of the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment at the Wits Business School. I'm excited to be shooting this episode with Barbara Sematimba here at the sidelines of the PASA 9th Annual Conference. Barbara, welcome to the episode.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you so much. And I know I just grabbed you and said, let's have a conversation. And of course, the usual reaction is, oh, I'm not prepared. I just want us to have a conversation about yourself, the work that you do, and some of the spaces that you engage in, and some of the impact that you have done as an individual, but also as part of a collective. And maybe we can start, where we are now and what you do. I see that you are a steward officer.
I am.
/ public officer. What does that mean for CivSource?
Thank you so much, Prof, and really for the opportunity and for the confidence that we could have this conversation impromptu. So CivSource is a learning organization, first and foremost. So we pride ourselves in doing the work that it takes to be teachable, as we represent the players that work with the space that exists between civil society and philanthropy. So to be a leading organization and a learning organization means that there's an element of representation. You represent those that you lead, and so it's the best way that we see ourselves is a beacon of learning as we lead. And in that same stance, therefore, we are very clear that we don't know it all, but we are not shy at all from doing our best and learning from the best. So the stance that we take is one of being teachable as we lead. And so inevitably, the attitude of serving comes in, of serving the people that we represent and learning from them and allowing them to be represented, allowing their voice and their purpose to be heard and to dignify their role. And so service is a very big part of what we do. And so when you're a servant, you actually, a servant leader, you steward. You steward the resources. You steward those that have been entrusted into you. You steward them in their time, in the resources that they have, and representing them and allowing them to actually come forth. So steward leadership is really about representation, accountability, and amplifying those that you lead.
And I imagine it speaks directly to what I think CivSource is, because for quite some time I had followed the work that you and your colleagues, Jackie in particular, have been doing. It was only this year that I sat with Jackie in a panel that I realized you are a philanthropy advisor, and you advise philanthropies. You also make them realize where to spend their resources wisely, etc., etc. And so stewardship, in a way, would speak directly to what CivSource does, and maybe we can speak a bit about what you do as an organization. There's an episode that might be coming soon, which we did with Jackie, but I think it would be good to also hear your perspective, especially representing CivSource in South Africa, because your headquarters is in Uganda, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So CivSource is an independent advisory firm. We work in the space where philanthropy meets civil society, and our part is to make philanthropy thrive and civil society to be strengthened in the work they do. So we play an advisory role. We actually have an arm called Civ Advisory,
Yeah.
where we advise grant makers, we advise the philanthropy world on how, where to, and we play that role, that intermediary role. And we also do the work where others, we hope to amplify those that wouldn't normally be able to, don't have the infrastructure or don't have the know-how.
Yeah.
So we play that advisory role, both for the philanthropy and the donor, and also for those that we represent. We advise the donee, those
Yeah.
that are receiving
Yeah.
grants. We handhold them in the processes right from the proposal, right from the due diligence stage, and identifying them for the donors and hand-holding them through the process of application. We streamline and make that process palatable and make it dignified, that they are able to say, represent their need, and we structure that for them. And even beyond, when the grant has come
Yeah.
through,
Yeah.
we handhold them through the process and make sure there's accountability and reporting. And we go beyond just the everyday business. We also enable them to get opportunities to showcase themselves in places maybe they wouldn't.
Yeah.
For instance, during the lockdown time, we did work, we have an art fund called the Konyesha Art Fund. And we found out that even as there was limitation of movement and that kind of thing, we had the ability to showcase their work online. And we organized gallery, an online gallery where those networks of artists were created.
Yeah.
And this was not part and parcel of the actual framework, but it was something that would elevate what they're doing. And so that, so we advise, and we stand in the place, and we are able to advise. We advise donors and we advise the donees, and we carry that relationship through. And the other thing that we do as well is that we fiscal host, we grant manage. We grant manage the actual funds.
Yeah.
So we've got an arm called Civ Fund. Civ Fund is the independent, the non-profit, and it handles the donations and the funding that comes in from our grants and our donors. So we in some instances, we grant manage.
Yeah.
We make sure that the processes are in place. But on the other hand, we just hold the money and we fiscal host
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah.
Then we also have an element of leadership. We have a training, we build knowledge. And we've got a leadership program called the Mopane program, where we support civil society. Like I said, we strengthen civil society. So we have a big emphasis on leadership and on learning. And so our GROW program, it takes prospective leaders and those that are aspiring, and even young leaders, young both in age but also in the stance that they've just started a leadership journey. We have a program that takes them through very intentionally skills and help them find their rank among the sector, connect them to other leaders, and create a network of support even after the program.
Yeah.
And so we pride ourselves in learning with them. And so a lot of the content that we have put together comes from our lessons as we also as we grew, but also those that are the business lessons about finance, about strategy, about leading oneself, about well-being as leaders, because leaders have very few places to actually go and get help themselves, especially when you're new in the field. The other thing that we do is within the leadership program, we also teach what we call transitional leadership, which we practice.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things we have established, because we found when we started, is that there were needs for learning around leadership and how to support leaders, and so GROW was built. And we have a leadership wellness program called Mopane, where leaders are taken aside and at a retreat. We call it a wellness retreat, where we allow leaders to pause and address how they can thrive as leaders. So we teach them self-care, we teach them mental health, we allow them to practice the things that they would do if they were looking after an organization, looking after. So the Mopane Wellness Retreats allows leaders to have a time where they pause and begin to feel themselves. And it becomes a cohort of leaders that then team together and follow each other up and follow through. The other just few learning leadership lessons we've learned is transitional leadership is something that we started practicing as an organization. You know, some of the issues we have with leaders is that when we become a leader, leadership can get to your head, and you think you're the magic in the organization, and nothing can move. No signatures can happen without you. So in our learning around, because we are an African organization, we look at the scope of African leaders and ask ourselves, what are the lessons we can learn, both positive and negative? And some of them have been the ability to pass down leadership, the inability to pass down leadership, and also the intentionality to grow leadership within your organization. So we have a transitional leadership, which we practice since, I think, the last year and a half, 2 years now. We've been, every 3 or so months, we've got a standing CEO who then represents, who leads the organization and does makes all the decisions. And our founding CEO, the Chief Executive, Ms. Jacqueline Asimwe, would also report to that person and check in and let them know where she is. They take on the decisions, they run the staff, they set the tone, they carry on and have the ability to check do the signatures, check the finances. And so that transparency and trust given to another leader shows that they too can be accountable.
And how has that worked? Because when I first heard about it, I was taken aback and thinking, wait a minute, so everyone gets to be a CEO and everyone gets to basically learn how an organization is run, and the founding director ends up reporting to most of this. But what has been the experience? I mean, if you were to reflect back now, there are positives, but certainly there could be some challenges that you have faced as well.
So not the entire team leads at the top. So we have an executive. We have a senior management team that exists of about 5 people at a time. I think it's 4 at the moment. The lead executive, the senior management. So these are people that are already, they head our senior management team, and they already represent the organization in their right. The executive lead. So they're the ones who we do the rotational leadership. And what it does is that it bridges the gap to the place that in case we had an emergency
for succession purposes,
and also for transparency and accountability. I think one of the biggest things, especially when you're holding donor funding and you're able to have that level of transparency in your books and your accountability. It gives every single person the ability to have to check and have an internal check and balance to know that the checks and the balances are not dependent on only two people knowing maybe the finance and the head, but everybody at the point in which they come in and are able to actually know that they're answerable. And every one of that team is answerable. So it checks each one of them to know that at any one point, when I'm at the seat, I need to know that how do I need to account for the ins and outs. And I think the other thing though is that sometimes I find that maybe 3 months is sometimes not enough time. And it would be, and I think what we've done at some point, it has to be extended. And I think within the 3 months, the heaviness sits on it says the person who holds the crown is basically is just given almost 3 months to show up. And I think the pressure, I would imagine, the pressure on the individual is, depending on what's going on in the organization, there might be a program that they've not necessarily been involved with. So it puts you on your toes to show up and know that you can be one of them. And so that is at the top. But we have another layer of leadership, which we call the 360 leaders, who are the team, then the line managers that report into the senior management. They also get an opportunity to lead. And everyone in their right gets an opportunity to lead. Right from the people that the non programmatic staff are able to, they have to show up and oftentimes, and we include them in our meetings. And I think the ability to stand up and represent the organization at any given time. And the other thing that I do appreciate about CivSource's learning intentionality as a leader, building leaders, is that within our teams, we have opportunities to lead. every single person within will have an opportunity to lead at an event, a program meeting, and we don't stay in our silos. You find that the operations will be able to work with those doing finance, those doing the event, the grow, and people multitask, and it enables us to be able to have almost like a 360 ability to lead. So the downside, I suppose, would be the length of time. I'm not so sure how much one can, as a leader, have the opportunity. Maybe when there's another a section of the year, possibly when there's more reporting and finance end of the year, you might miss out on some of those details. But I do think that it gives everyone that sense of accountability, and everyone feels that they need to be able to represent.
I'm supposing at some point we might want to just do maybe a write-up of this, because, you know, different organizations have been experimenting with different types of leadership, and this is unique. The other one that groups have been doing is co-leadership or co-directorship, where you actually have, you know, 2 or 3 directors leading the institution at the same time. The Black Feminist Fund does that a lot, and there are several others. So maybe at some point we just might want to just do like a scan of the different styles of leadership that organizations have adopted, and certainly I'm interested to understand what the impact of this rotation, 3 months, 6 months, especially for the second tier leaders.
I think
you
so.
know, I'll be very much interested in that, because, you know, when I was preparing to take over Trust Africa and the Southern Africa Trust, my boss then, Akwasi, sent me to a program at the Maxwell School of Governance, and that program was just focusing on the second tier leaders, you know, preparing you to be ready whenever, you know, you are called upon to lead an institution. And I found that to be so useful. So when the opportunity came for me to run the Southern Africa Trust, it was almost as if I had been leading. Because I was prepared. I had gone to do this course. I had been thrust under that, you know, position where I'm understudying my boss and I'm acting on his behalf. So by the time I was given an institution to run, all I did was to map out my first 90 days. What am I doing in my first 90 days? And that was it.
Wow.
So by the time I got to my 90th day, I already knew exactly what I was going to change, what exactly I don't need to change, how I'm going to lead this element, that element. And I already knew the organization in terms of who are the people who are cultural interpreters, who are the people that I must work with, etc. But that's because I had attended that course.
And you were given the tools.
And I was given the tools about how to think. So even some of the books that one needed to read before you take over, you know. So that's how it happened. And I then went on to suggest the same material to people that I knew were being set up to take over institutions, and give them those books and say, read this book, the first 90 days, for example.
Wow.
You know?
And I must add that when we say we're a learning organization, we don't just say that because we need to fill in that sort of criteria to say we read or whatever.
Yeah.
So when you talk about tooling the leaders to actually lead.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to assume and give them the space and say, get on.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate the fact that within the organization, we have had coaches. We've like the second level of management, which were like team leads. We spent a whole year, we called it the 360 leaders. We had a coach assigned to us.
Yeah.
And we would meet as a team monthly, and going through that whole learning your team, learning how to lead yourself, lead your team, and to make an organization thrive. And then we had individual sessions. We had 2 individual sessions a month, and this was paid for by the organization. And over and above the individual coaching, which I think was for me one of the biggest perks of joining the team, to see that I, as an employer, they cared about my ability to learn and grow, and how I was doing and how I was coping, giving me the tools. But the other thing was the fact that they then allow you to take those things and bring and emulate them within your team.
Yeah.
So in your case, where you're provided us the space to do it, but you're allowed the tools as well. You're allowed to learn, and so you're equipped, but you're also given the opportunity to practice, so that by the time it's an overnight change and say you need to step up, you might hesitate, but you know you have what it takes. And actually you then look forward to practicing it. And so it's a small organization, but I do find that within that proximity, we learn with each other, and we are given the space. So it's an element of trust. It's a big element of trust.
So that's more an internal look at strengthening the organization, but your mandate is really to help the field. And I find that there are not many philanthropy advisors in the continent compared to, let's say, North America, Europe. I mean, if you go to the US and you're looking for philanthropy advisors, there are just many. But in the continent, it was my first time actually formally meeting a group that says we're a philanthropy advisor. And then it dawned on me that actually there are so many of us who are doing philanthropy advisory, but we don't call ourselves that way. So was the gap only in Uganda and South Africa, or the gap is actually continental? And how do you see us addressing the entire continent? Because right now I think you are probably one of the few that have formally come out and said, we are an advisory firm.
So like our name connotates, we are CivSource Africa. Our geographical space is Africa, but our thinking and our outlook is for Africa and by Africans, with Africans. So when we came to the advisory, because we work as an intermediary within donors, it was inevitable that we had to get into how best to do this work, and that gap was seen. So Civ Advisory was actually set up because of that very reason, to service our donors, but especially those that the donors are granting, because we believe in dignified and sustainable giving, and we would want to make sure that it not just is a once-off giving, but it impacts their lives, and it's sustainable. So the best way to do that was to make sure that we handhold to the extent where they can then walk on their own, because that's how we see the growth. And so Civ Advisory is an entire team. Well, it's not huge. I think it's Malcolm Pamizo, the legal officer who actually represents who services that, and it's set up with the understanding of the track record that we have had in the past, because even if we're 6 years old now, we have an 18-year background of servicing a philanthropic organization. So Wellspring Fund was where we started. And so for social justice organizations and bringing in that space of civic work, that history is important, and not many organizations can claim to have that kind of background. So we wanted to make use and take advantage of the fact that we've got that historical institutional understanding. But I think the biggest one is the people, is the people factor, and understanding and being able to create rigor that will sustain the philanthropy. It's one thing to have money and a program and tick a box, but we handhold, we make sure accountability, reporting, communication, and removing the uncomfortable conditions that might cause the donor funding to be unattractive in either side. So advising, for instance, we do have a tracker. We have a tracker that keeps abreast we track the philanthropy in Africa, who is doing what way, and so the Civ Advisory uses that data and collects that data, and we're able to keep our donors abreast and able to advise. And so when it comes to choosing partners and doing due diligence, it's done through research and from a point of view of understanding what the needs are.
And you have just said that most of you already had a background, so huge background in terms of the work that you do in philanthropy and advisory. But in your case, I think you spent about 13 years or so with SACRA.
I did. I did.
So maybe let's talk a bit about that, because that sounds like a very different area altogether. Clinical research.
Absolutely.
And
So I'm actually an educationist.
Yeah.
That's my training.
Yeah.
And so when I came to South Africa in 1999.
Yeah.
This is my 24th year, and my first work was with development work. I worked with ActionAid.
Yeah.
I worked in the Women Rights Department, then I worked in the HIV program, and I worked there for 6 years in ActionAid.
Yeah.
And then the ActionAid office, that was the time when the international office had moved from the UK down to South Africa, and we were part of that Southern Africa program. And after about 8 years of that structure, they created a South Africa program, and South Africa program then took a shape of having to be South African. And
Yeah.
I am from Uganda originally. And so I stepped out at that point and looked for an opportunity for me to be able to work. I was studying at that time.
Yeah.
I was doing a master's in public health.
Yeah.
So I needed an opportunity to work and study and raise my children at the same time. So I because of the work that I had done at ActionAid, HIV work, I'd been involved in a TB program, and after that, I got my research work when I was studying was around adolescent health, and in the adolescent health work that I did, I was very keen to understand where the gaps of delivery were in Africa.
Yeah.
And what the issues were.
Yeah.
So I got involved in research. I got involved in an initiative called the Joint Learning Initiative with HIV and AIDS because of my background in the work I supported in HIV in ActionAid program, and I got involved in TB work because TB is a big factor in Africa with HIV, and through that I met the clinical trials people.
Yeah.
And so with my TB clinical work research and the work with HIV, I met the clinical research sector, and they were looking for someone to manage the organization. So that's how that was the not very far-fetched, but that's how I got involved.
Yeah.
And it gave me the space to be able to work, because I reported to a board, and I worked independently. I was the only employee of the organization. So I was able to continue my studies, continue my work, or my administrative work. So it gave me a pause to study, but it also gave me an opportunity to manage an organization.
Yeah.
I reported to the board, and our membership was 650 strong, and I administrated that online, and I was able to put together. It was really a meet where I met the stakeholders. I managed the stakeholder engagements. I managed the stakeholder sponsorships. So it was PR, administration, but more than anything, growing an organization to be from a fairly informal one to a more national one. Yeah. So that was my experience, and then from there, I had always wanted to continue work within in an African setting. So I was going back to Uganda to do some consulting work, and that's when the opportunity for CivSource came up.
And so how did those two? I mean, there are others as well, but of course, the SACRA and the ActionAid, functions and roles. How did they prepare you for what you are doing now? For CivSource, but also as we prepare to end, I would want to talk a bit about the other initiative that you are involved in, which is Women in Philanthropy South Africa.
So ActionAid was really, I think I would call it my birthing into advocacy, into learning, into seeing firsthand what advocacy work looks like. Because ActionAid is a rights-based organization that really our slogan was make poverty history, and it's addressing the gaps, and the big one was the gaps in Africa. So it was around education, HIV, and the women rights, the movement was very, very well supported at ActionAid. And so Everwin Joyce was my first manager, and I was exposed to a global movement of women rights advocacy. And for me at that point is when I got the grassroots and understanding of what grassroots organizations look like. because we not only had meetings, but there was a lot of research and documentation, research that was coming from India, from the Indians, from South America. And at the meetings, the representation came from all over the world. But the reports and the writings of Action Aid were grassroots based. We had our Action Aid HIV program was called Mutapola, which was amplifying the voice of the woman the African woman who faces the brunt of HIV.
Yeah.
The burden is on her shoulders, and so it characteristically introduced me to what development looks like and the gaps on the ground and the initiatives and how women are the backbone of addressing poverty, inequality, and when you educate a woman and you educate a girl, you alleviate a lot of problems. So that was my first entry, and yet my background in Uganda had been seeing how HIV was devastating, but the grassroots approach and how church organizations, women, held the health system. They basically looked after home-based care, how women organized themselves and did that, and from a giving perspective, no one paid them to do it. They organized, so there was agency, there was organization, and then they organized themselves for resources. So with that background, and when I came into the clinical trials work, is to then see how systems work. And that's why I chose when I chose the public health degree, was I realized that decision makers and systems have to work together with grassroots to address the problems. So it's one thing to know what the problem is, but unless it's systematically dealt with by decision makers, understanding what the issues are, a representation of and hearing the people that are affected, but putting systems and money and resources in place. And so when it came to clinical trials, I was able to see how from the side of medicine, how this could be a solution, and also understanding that it takes money. These are the pharmaceutical organizations that were members of SACRA, and how they spend their money. And at the end of the day, there's big money, big pharma, there's clinical research organizations, there academia doing ethics and research. But at the end of the day, it is the person, the individual at the bottom. And we can make it all about money, and that has been our big drive, about money and making sure that the research is going on in place, and who and how long it takes, and systems that support and not in place to be able to see that research happens in time. So because we worked with government and the health product authority, trying to streamline to see that there was liaison and there was cohesion around systems. So with having seen right from what the grassroots issues are, the representation, or and people's agency in organizing themselves, resources available, and what it takes to do that, it gave me it really, for me, as one, as an educationist, but two, as a woman who has grown up seeing ordinary women and ordinary people representing themselves and having the opportunity to do so, but also those that have been charged within organizations as leaders and people representing them. What does that look like, and what impact does it have? So as when CivSource, the idea of now the money part of it and the philanthropy and bringing the money to those that need it, and seeing that those that actually need it are represented. It works. It works for me. It worked in like a full circle coming as full circle to see that there's always money, but it's how is that money channeled, and it takes systems, it takes collaborations, it takes platforms, it takes people that understand and represent those that need it. But having said all that, we can't work in a vacuum. And looking at Africa and how the different platforms that CivSource is involved with the African Philanthropy Network, with the East African Philanthropy Network, CivSource South Africa, where we are now, represents, and we sit on the Women in Philanthropy Network. we realized that we have to have a constituency where we can work and have a mandate.
Yeah.
So collaboration and using the platforms and collaborating with key people, decision makers, to represent those that need it the best is actually a privilege.
Yeah, yeah. So it's very fascinating how our lives at times, I always talk about how I look back and see how I was collecting dots. And then later on I sit and think, these dots have connected. Somehow. And I'm listening to you and thinking, wait a minute. So when you were studying, going to Action Aid, going to SACRA, and then now CivSource, it is as if it was so designed nicely.
To understand the system.
But also to deal with issues that you care about. As I'm speaking to you, I can already tell you care a lot about the fate of women. You're almost getting emotional as you are speaking. And,
we stand on the shoulders of strong, and it's amazing that when you look at the African woman, I mean, I'm from a family of many women, but women who have turned their ordinary environments. My mother we used to have a garden, a shamba, and there are women from the village that would come, and even if we didn't have money to pay them, they would dig and they would take resources. They would take the food, they would harvest, and water, because we had running water. So water and food was payment. Even when you waited for the bit at the end of the month, you were paid a bit, but it was never enough. And then there was education. She was a teacher. So there was always family planning. When children had running stomachs in the area, it was dehydration salts, and she would show them how to mix it. I'm from a scope of women who have set up women organizations, and I've seen, because there was a need, and nobody, it was almost thrust upon them, because they had an exposure of what medical health care looks like, what proper planning for family planning looks like, and taking the people in your environment and rising up with them, not leaving them behind, and having been taught by women. I was in an all-girls school, and a lot of the women there were role models. You looked at them and you realized there was a strength. There were things about them you admired, but more than anything, they cared for our learning, for our good, and they picked us up and made us better, gave us opportunities when we never saw the good in us. And so I think, because I have seen, and not just the women, we've had men in our lives who have done that as well. And seeing when you pick someone up and you're committed for the long haul, it tells a different story.
Yeah, it does. And maybe we end with this initiative that you are also part of, the Women in Philanthropy South Africa. Maybe let's talk a bit about what it is, what it seeks to achieve, and what the plans are going forward.
So WIPSA, which is the Women in Philanthropy South Africa, started in 2010, actually. It's a network of passionate women that are from both civic and corporate organizations that came together in 2010, and the founders were Kate Clayton and Moya Wolf, and I think they had 10 founding members, and they came together as women in the Western Cape who already were involved in charity, and to network and to hear from each other. And as the years went on, women like Sheila Gastro was involved with them, and it grew to a place where it was a recognized need. And post COVID 2021-22, when meetings became online, it became clear that there was a need to actually learn from each other, not just take readings, because a lot of information is available online, but to come together in a room and collaborate. So for the next 5 years now, we are rebranding, and there's a strategy around learning, collaborating, inspiring each other, and being in a place where we zero in on how women can collaborate in very intentional ways in showcasing what good is happening, and not to work in silos. And so, for instance, when CivSource South Africa started in 2021, By 2022, we had suggested that from the Western Cape, we have representation in Johannesburg. So to broaden the geography and the scope, because we realized that we need to make access it more accessible and open for more. We hadn't had of another philanthropic organization at that point, which was working around women. And so with the launch of the CAPC venture, the initiative, we realized that this is what women are good at. Women are good at identifying who is doing what and strengthening. And I think for us, it's the learnings that we are important. We want to be able to document what's going on, to be able to share that learning. And I think when we collaborate and create co-created spaces, when you don't know, for instance, we've had seminars on taxation, very high level skilled, 45 minutes, people come in and teach organizations how to go through their tax, trainings on board and governance, training on marketing and the latest AI instruments. So these are small spaces, but you'd be surprised that there are people that wouldn't have that community, and it's not that affordable at the end of the day. But with the technology we have, with the spaces we have, we want to. WIPSA is determined to provide a service for women to collaborate, to learn, and to be inspired to come together and do things within that, and to collaborate even with the CAPC venture. And we're really looking forward to like almost a rebranding, to become more of a service provider, a platform where women gather and see how we can support each other.
And certainly, I mean, from CAPC, I think we have spoken about this. We certainly want to make sure that we collaborate, amplify, but also bring the African perspective to it, so that it's not just South Africa, but the whole continent. Because, like you're saying, our research and analysis has shown us that women play the most active roles in philanthropy, no matter how you look at it. But they are not made visible, they are not made empowered, etc. So even us at CAPC, the reason why we brought up these initiatives, because we realized among our research programs, we did not have something specific on women. Among our modules for teaching, we did not have anything specific on women. And we started looking at ourselves and thinking, why are we not addressing this gap? So it's important for us to find other institutions that are doing something similar and see ways in which we can collectively do this together. And so I was very happy when we had to meet and discuss and collaborate going forward. So thank you so much, Barbara, for taking the time. I know we have to rush to sessions, but grabbing you early this morning and having this chat was very important for us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity and for believing that CivSource has a part in this platform, and that CivSource South Africa, we were the newest kid on the block 2 years ago, but now we are happy that we have collaborations like yours.
No, certainly. I mean, we did an episode with Jackie. We're doing now one with you, and if an opportunity allows us to do another with somebody else from the institution, even better, because like I said, we are probably the only institution that has formally said we are offering philanthropy advisory.
Absolutely.
So the more we showcase the work that you do, the more we inspire others to do something similar in different parts of the continent.
Absolutely.
Because the space is really big, and we'll need more CivSource of this world to actually do that. So thank you so much, Barbara.
You for your time.
Thank you. That was Barbara Sematimba joining us on our conversations on African philanthropy. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the CAPC podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.